from the Washington, D.C. area. It's the Inside Scoop, all the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Good evening. I'm Catherine Reed. I'm your host for Inside Scoop Virginia tonight. Joining me tonight as my first of a wonderful lineup of guests is James Parrish, who is the Executive Director of Equality Virginia. Tonight we are going to be talking about transgender issues. And when I say transgender issues, I want to include everything that people are struggling to understand about meeting the needs of people who are in that transgender community. So first of all, thank you, James Parrish, so much for joining me tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Full disclosure, James and I are both involved in Equality Virginia. He is the executive director, and I sit on the board of Equality Virginia. I think I've been on the board for about 4 years.
Yes.
And so I think the work that we do is extremely important, and we do, as shorthand, talk about the LGBT community. And one of the things I want to do tonight as we go along, because we've got 4 segments and a lot of information, I don't want to presume that everybody in our audience understands the terms that we're using. So shorthand, we use LGBT for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender. But there's a lot more alphabet after that.
Yes. Well, I mean, there's understanding the greater community. So there's Q. You'll hear Q used as queer or questioning. You'll hear A for ally, and then there's quite a few more letters after that. But you're correct. Most people are not familiar with that acronym, or that it stands for the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender community.
So as we go forward, if you ever think, or if I think that maybe people don't know what we talk, I'm going to stop you and ask to maybe explain a little more. From a high-level perspective, let's talk about Equality Virginia and how long Equality Virginia has been involved in meeting the needs of that community that we just read the alphabet soup for.
Right. Equality Virginia was founded as Virginians for Justice in 1989. So this is our 26th year. We are the leading advocacy organization for gay and transgender issues, mostly at the General Assembly. We are the eyes and ears for the LGBT community and allies of the LGBT community, following good bills, promoting good bills, defeating bad bills. We also work in local government. If it's policy or ordinance or legislation oriented, that is where we stand in the state. We are the go-to organization for those issues.
So we had a really, to me, a lot of people were not expecting our Attorney General's ruling about the Dillon Rule. And I don't want to get into sort of the weeds about what the Dillon Rule means, except that localities are restricted about making local regulations that have not been approved by the state. But he came out with a ruling that affects school boards.
Right. So in Virginia, we have a very restrictive version of the Dillon Rule, which, as you said, says that local governments can only do what the General Assembly has told them they can do. In many other states, the interpretation is if the state government hasn't told you can't do it, then you can do it. And this marks the first time that a local government, our school boards, have been vested with the authority to protect their employees and their students with non-discrimination policies that expand and updated to include sexual orientation and gender identity.
So that has caused a little bit of a furor in not just several different school systems, Gloucester, Stafford, and in Fairfax County, about the school board policy created to protect the transgender population from non-discrimination. We already earlier had sexual orientation added to that policy, but these are separate things. Do you think people understand that these are separate things?
A lot of people, including people in our new community, intermix the words so much. So the shorthand of this is your sexual orientation is who you're attracted to. My sexual orientation is gay because I am attracted to men. Your gender identity is the gender you identify with. So my gender identity is male. And so there is that distinction there that a lot of people don't understand. And I'll also go back a step and say that before the Attorney General's ruling, we've been working with school boards to create bullying and harassment policies that did include sexual orientation and gender identity. And Fairfax was one of the schools we worked with a couple of years ago to add gender identity. But the AG ruling is now going one step further, not only to say students can be protected by non-discrimination policies, but or even more importantly, teachers. Our employees of school systems now can be protected based on their gender identity and their sexual orientation. And as you said, this has caused some concern here in Fairfax County when it was passed, when they updated the policy in May. But it really is just aligning the employment policy and non-discrimination policy of Fairfax County Public Schools with what most of our corporate leaders, all of our Fortune 500 companies based in Virginia, have policies that include sexual orientation and gender identity. And Fairfax County wants to be, I feel like one of the reasons they did this is that they want to be, continue to be seen as a leader in school policy, which they are in the nation. They're one of the largest school systems in the nation. And they want to continue to attract the best and brightest teachers and administrators, as well as protecting those people and their students. Then updating policies like this are important and necessary.
You bring up something really interesting because Forbes magazine actually published an article, I want to say 2 weeks ago, about business leading on transgender policies, inclusive, protective transgender policies, going back to 2011. And it seems to have been done somewhat under the radar because a lot of these companies and their policies, it was very much news to me, and I consider myself somebody who's an activist in this space. So business truly does seem to be leading. Is that ultimately going to be something that sways the average person in the community?
Well, I think in a state like Virginia, where the business community has a lot of influence at the General Assembly, it is definitely seen as something to lead there, to give them direction to, this is what you need to be doing. Our governor, when he came in last January before last, his executive order 1, he was the first governor to not only include sexual orientation, which Governors Kane and Warner had, but he included gender identity in the executive order protecting state employees. So he too understood that he wanted to set the stage of leadership that Virginia is an opening, inclusive place. And that leadership's necessary. There's many laws. Gay and transgender people can still be fired from their jobs. They can still be kicked out of housing. They can still be denied service and public accommodations from local businesses. But leadership starts with the top, with the governor, but it also starts with our corporate community. And then it also, on the school side, it's starting with Fairfax County, which is the largest school system in Virginia.
It was very interesting because Arlington County schools pretty much adopted the same language with very little fanfare. To your knowledge, other than Arlington and Fairfax, are there any other school systems in Virginia either who have passed it or are considering it?
Alexandria and Charlottesville both have passed it as well. So we have 4 independent school systems in Virginia out of the 134 independent school systems. So
4 out of 134.
Well, number-wise, that's low, but population, because of Fairfax, you're already probably approaching 10% of employees and students in Virginia's public schools are covered with this new non-discrimination policies.
And I think that's really important as we go forward too, and for so many different reasons. But looking toward the appropriate structure policies for children in schools, it seems to me it's incumbent on policymakers to first look at the safety of these kids. Do you think that the anti-bullying policies that exist in some of the other school systems currently without this gender identity piece will go far enough in protecting? Because let's acknowledge that there are transgender students in our system.
I would say it's safe to assume there's transgender, well, I haven't seen the data, that there are transgender students in all 134 of Virginia's independent school systems. It would surprise me if there's not. And the good thing we see is in school system after school system, they're trying their best to do what they need to be doing. And the federal government has already made clear that if students are not allowed to use the public accommodations of the gender they identify with, you're subject to Office of Civil Rights investigation. And many people expect them to go even further and really tie that to losing federal funding. And so the policy coming out of the federal government, the leadership from our AG and our governor are making it clear that gender identity and sexual orientation you shall not be discriminated against because of those 2 issues, in addition to race, sex, gender, and many of the other protections that have existed. But some people will say, well, let's just say no bullying at all, and just have a blanket policy like that. And the reason that enumerated bullying policies are important is because in a study done a couple years ago by GLSEN, it clearly showed school systems that have enumerated bullying policies that include gender identity and sexual orientation have lower incidences of bullying than those that do not. And until that number changes, we will be out there working with school systems to make sure that they are including those two terms and including those two classes of students in their protections.
So I'm going to stop you. GLSEN. GLSEN stands for Gay, Lesbian...
Educational Student Network.
There you go, Educational Student Network. And there are a number of organizations like that who are busy working alongside. We collaborate with those organizations. They're across the country, so they're both local organizations, state organizations, and national organizations.
Equality Virginia works with many national organizations creating policies that, because you don't want cookie cutter approaches to all this stuff. We want best practice policies across the nation. Just like we just dealt with marriage, you don't want to be married in this state and then move to the next state and your marriage not recognized. And for the same thing, we're working with all the school systems of Virginia, is because we don't want to have a high school transgender youth at this school system, which is understanding the right and legal thing to do, and then for some reason that student has to transfer to another county
across
the next year,
yeah.
and they don't have a policy in place, and then the student and the student's family has to re-navigate this process all over again. And unfortunately, in a couple of places, as we've seen in Gloucester and Stafford, it becomes a lightning rod, and it's really a lightning rod on that one family or that one student, which is completely unfair to that family and that student, because the policy has been laid out that our children in our schools should be using the public accommodations of the gender. And the key word I think there is that they identify with, not whatever parameters the school is setting up or whatever test the school thinks is necessary. It is the gender that student identifies with. But on the flip side of that, that's taken very seriously. And we've had a couple politicians who've been flippant about, well, if I had known these policies were in place when I was in high school, I would have gone.
That was terrible.
That is, first of all, it's a wrong statement, and it's also a dangerous statement, because it's clearly someone either not understanding what gender identity means or purposely harming kids who are transgender. None of these families, if anyone takes any amount of time to meet families and the kids that are navigating this process, no one is taking it lightly. No one's being flippant about it. No one's switching their gender day in and day out. These are lifelong struggles that these families are coming with, and our school systems need to support that.
Well, and when we come back from our break, we are actually going to talk with Sara Simone, who is a transgender woman, and she is going to enlighten us a little bit more and to help people understand what some of these issues are. So please stay tuned. We'll be back after this break to talk with Sara Simone and James Parrish.
Saving for retirement might be easy for some folk, but for others, it might take a little more work. And for those who haven't started, there are still things you can do to catch up.
Oh, that is good news.
Like getting out from underneath past debt. And don't get wrapped up with high-interest credit cards.
Get you some eyes.
Be diversified with your investments. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Your financial goals are not out of reach. The choice is clear. For a happy ending, choose to save.
Everyone with alcohol and drug addiction is in the same boat. With treatment, you can find solid ground. For drug and alcohol information and treatment referral for you or someone you know, call 1-800-662-HELP.
Dude, are you sure you want this tattoo? Because just do it.
Some mistakes in life are permanent. Like hearing loss. To learn how to protect your hearing, visit asha.org.
You've probably heard about heart disease, but did you know that it's the #1 killer of women nationwide? Heart disease claims more lives each year than breast cancer, lung cancer, or strokes combined. But there are steps you can take to protect yourself against it. For more information on how you can prevent heart disease, contact your local American Heart Association or visit their website at www.americanheart.org.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back. I'm Catherine Reed. I'm your host for Inside Scoop Virginia. Joining me in this segment is Sara Simone and James Parrish. James is the Executive Director of Equality Virginia, and he met Sara, which is how she agreed to be on our show as our guest. Thank you so much for joining us, Sara.
Thank you so much for having me.
So on our break, we were talking about, James was like, when was the first time that you were aware of Equality Virginia? And you said, well, it was a very interesting story.
Well, the story goes like this. I've worked in Fairfax County for 15 of the last 17 years, Northern Virginia for 17 years. And when I transitioned in 2011, I was afraid to death if I would still be able to keep my job. I was working as a shelter director. And the company I worked with was very supportive. I left that company after about a year and a half and started with another company, this one in Fairfax, I was in Alexandria. And I found out then that gender identity was not a protected class for discrimination, and that I could be actually fired from my job, and I loved what I was doing. And so I actually contacted Pat Fawcett with the Human Rights Commission and Sharon Bulova. And I sent letters to both of them, letting them know that I was really frustrated about it. Is there anything that we can do in Fairfax County? Since we're supposed to be the leader, and I really love living in Fairfax County. And Sharon Bulova, she expressed her frustration about what you had mentioned earlier, the Dillon rule. And she felt in some ways her hands were tied. And that's when I started to seek out other organizations. And I'm actually contacted GLAAD, and they gave me a whole list of organizations, and that's how I found out about Equality Virginia, and I contacted them.
And I would just say that those are the most frustrating calls we get when it comes to discrimination, because there are no protections for everyday gay and transgender Virginians. And unfortunately, the first thing I have to say is when someone's called and lost their job or been discriminated against is, I feel for the situation you're in, but unfortunately, that was a legal course of action and you have no recourse. And so, that's why we work hard every day to change policies and change lives, and because I hate when we get those calls.
Mm-hmm. And so how have your coworkers, so you've been here working here for the last 15 years, and so, your journey in through your transition, what has been the reaction of your community, your family, the people you work with, your friends?
I've had friends who have stood by me and some who won't talk to me, actually, right now. My family, it was difficult for them because they had known who I was for so many years. But they're slowly coming around, and I give them space to do that, because I understand, how challenging it is for someone who they looked at someone as this person of this particular gender all their life. And I actually remember my sister, I invited her to speak at a function we were having with the organization I was at, and the first thing she said when she got up there was, "I love having a big brother," and
and you sort of like.
Yes. But they're coming along. They're coming along. Coworkers have been amazing, and I've been, I think, one of the lucky ones because I've worked for 3 organizations since I started my transition in 2011, and all 3 have been very, very supportive. And I still remember when I first came out, I was actually scared to death. And the executive director, they had kind of an in-service, a Trans 101, and I wasn't there because I didn't want to be there, because I was like, okay, you guys can go ahead and have that. And we brought in someone to actually facilitate it. And then there was a letter they read that I'd written. And so I went in the next day afterward, and I got all these hugs, and people told me they're so proud of me, and that made me feel really good and really excited. And again, I was fortunate, and I think that there is a survey done where only 60% of companies in Virginia have gender identity policies. Protections. And so I was one of the fortunate ones.
So you would advocate for the fact that having a policy helps the whole community within the company. I mean, not just the person who's transitioning, but having a policy that every employee is aware of. Would you say that kind of builds a framework of expectation?
That builds a framework of understanding that you have a good worker there. And a quote that I like to use is the one that Dr. Martin King used about judging someone by the content of their character. In an employment situation, can they do their job? And why would you lose an excellent worker just because that person wants to live the life that they really need to live?
And I think that's exactly correct, Catherine, about creating that framework of meeting so everyone understands like the expectations and everyone's able to navigate that, and it answers a lot of questions. And it's how we got really connected with Sarah at our Transgender Ties conference, bringing the community, the advocates, and especially to get resources into the hands of the transgender community because they're so under-resourced in the state. And a piece that she said about, getting the comfort and getting the support of her friends and family is a wonderful thing because sadly that is not what we hear in so many situations. And it's important, and it's the work that we're doing around trans visibility because about 90% of Virginians and Americans know someone who's gay or lesbian, but only 1 in, I think, 11 people in the last study know someone who is transgender. And until we change those numbers, they're not going to get the support, and we're not going to be able to change the laws to protect people and to get those policies in every company.
You know, policies don't change culture, but I think several remarkable things have happened. Laverne Cox was the speaker at our Commonwealth dinner 2 years ago, and Laverne Cox is remarkable because she's a wonderful actress. She's a great spokesperson for herself and for this community. And then the Caitlyn Jenner transition. People who would not otherwise have paid attention seem to be paying attention. And so how have you experienced both of those things, or the visibility, going back to the visibility of the transgender community? Do you feel like more people are more open to having this conversation?
I think they are, and I think they're understanding it more now. 2011 does not seem like a long time ago, but Laverne Cox wasn't out there in 2011.
You're right.
Neither was Janet Mock, someone else very famous. So when I transitioned then, I really didn't have role models. I just knew that I need what I need to do for myself. And it's really important that trans kids have role models too, someone to look up to, someone who's very positive. And yes, Laverne Cox is a very positive person. You know, she's actually definitely a role model for me. And I'm very excited about Caitlyn Jenner coming out. And I watched the ESPY Awards. I'm not really into a lot of sports, but I literally cried when I watched it. You know, it really struck me. And I think a lot of trans folks who watch that sort of understand that, yes, we do have someone who can be a role model, but also understanding that that she does have certain privileges because of her wealth that a lot of trans folks don't have, particularly trans women of color, who are facing tremendous amounts of violence. So that's actually an issue that I'm very passionate about, to help people understand about what is exactly going on in that community, because we don't hear a lot about that in the news.
That's true. And so how is the TIES conference, you mentioned that in passing, how is the TIES conference trying to bring all of this together?
Right, so it's a day-long conference at Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond on October 10th. And we have one track all day dedicated to parents of transgender youth. We have one track all day dedicated to transgender people who are just starting navigating the transition process. And we have, this year we're adding one day-long track for partners and spouses of people who are transitioning later in life. There's many married couples out there that one partner is now transitioning, and that's quite a bit to navigate with adult children and the relationship. So we're having that, and then we have a track for advocacy for people, allies and educators and community support and members of the transgender community who are maybe past needing initial support for their transition, but want to get out there and make the state a better place for everyone. And then we will be having for all-day training for transgender spokespeople. Quality Virginia wants to start a transgender spokesperson bank, you can say.
Like a speakers bureau?
A speakers bureau.
Trans?
Yes, and so they're going to go through some intensive training. She's already participated in a two-day training with it.
We've got somebody in our speakers bureau.
But yes,
Sara Simone.
So there's a lot going on, but and having advocates and having transgender people on the ground like Sarah are just invaluable to moving that needle on people understanding these issues.
And Equality Virginia has been amazing. In the state of Virginia, there wasn't a whole lot of support up until Equality Virginia really got in there, and I really enjoyed the Virginia Ties when I went last year. I'm definitely going to go this year. And there was so much networking I got to do and meeting other folks and especially professionals, but also hearing other stories. And it's very important to hear those personal stories. And I remember when I went in there and I had just had a really difficult situation in the neighborhood where I was living, where there was some bullying going on and calling slurs, and I shared that there. And I was surprised, not really surprised, that others, really empathized because they had gone through the same thing. And I had gone through that literally a week before I went to Virginia Ties. So.
And so let's talk about the importance of having a support community, both within the trans community, but among people, your neighbors, your coworkers, and people stepping up, even if they don't necessarily understand all of it, just the acceptance. How important is it to have the acceptance of people who are saying, you're my friend?
It's extremely important because you really don't feel alone. And my universe is a lot bigger than the trans community. I have a lot of cisgender friends. Hopefully you understand what that is.
So Catherine asked me to define terms. So cisgender is the I guess industry speak for people who are identifying with the gender that they were assigned when they were born. So I am, even though I'm a gay man, I'm cisgender because I was born assigned the sex of male and I identify as male.
Right. So that's what cisgender means, and I hope people really embrace the fact that you can learn this vocabulary so that when people speak, you're like, I know what you're talking about.
Yes, and I have a lot of friends in that cisgender friends who, and again, folks that have been my friends before. Folks that I had brunch yesterday with an individual who's an executive director of a company that I used to work for, and I started working for her 20 years ago in 1995. And she's like a mentor and one of my closest friends. And so I have so much support in that community, and I would not be where I'm at today without both communities, both types of support and family.
And that's what I really hope to do as we go forward, is to make people understand it's not about being separate and apart, it's about being inclusive and accepting, and not just about being tolerant. I don't even like the word tolerant. I'm like, these are people you know. They are people's family members. They are your neighbors. They're your coworkers. It is about embracing the fact that you accept people for exactly who they are. And I really appreciate the fact you're willing to be a spokesperson, because now that you've been on this show, I'm probably going to get emails going, how do we get Sara to come out and talk to our group? And so I hope you're really willing to do that. Oh no, putting it on the spot.
But I mean, it seems flippant, but the Caitlyn Jenner piece really has gone a long way for that, of like introducing this issue to a lot of homes that were purposefully or not purposely ignoring the whole concept of gender identity and the crisis that transgender people are living in. And you look at the studies, and they're underemployed and they're in danger on the streets, and it's safety is a huge issue for them.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Sara. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
So much, James. I appreciate you coming out to talk to us. I hope this will not be our last show. I really hope that you will be back to talk with us again. I need to get your contact information. And I will see you at Ties, James, on October 10th. And everybody is welcome to go to our website and sign up for that conference, October 10th. Join us for the next segment.
This year, 28,000 Americans will be diagnosed with oral cancer. Every year, 7,000 Americans die of oral cancer.
I'm Eva Cohen, and I'm an oral cancer survivor. I didn't fit the profile. I didn't smoke or drink. I had no family history of cancer, no family history of cancer. I was 31 years old. 31 years old. I went to see my dentist about a sore in my mouth that wouldn't heal. It was oral cancer. I had to have a radical neck dissection and a portion of my tongue reconstructed. I didn't know if I was going to live or die.
I'm Surgeon General Richard Carmona. The survival rate for oral cancer is only 50%. Oral cancer can happen to anyone. If you have a sore or lesion in your mouth that doesn't heal within 2 weeks, see your dentist. Early detection is the key.
Early detection saves lives. I know.
1 in 8 Americans goes hungry. One idea helped change that. A community started a garden that blossomed into farmers markets. 1 in 6 children lives in poverty. One group of women found an answer by opening a daycare center that their neighbors could afford. Today, 36 million Americans live in poverty. But one by one, people are helping themselves and each other to change the picture of poverty to one of hope. For easy ways you can help, visit povertyusa.org.
2 words for you. Pop quiz. Ready? Name any funny movie. A drama. Name a mystery. And one more thing. Name the movie your kids saw today in science class.
Know what really matters. Know about your kid's school. And know about your kid. Find out 100 ways to know more, do more.
we're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back. This is Inside Scoop Virginia. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and joining me in this segment is Laura Curtis and her son, Nathan. Welcome, Nathan and Laura. I appreciate you coming on the show. So about a year ago, I read a very interesting book called Raising My Rainbow by Lori Duran, who had started a blog by that title about raising her fabulously gender creative son. And it really was an interesting journey of a parent trying to sort out in a world where you couldn't Google the answers to what you do when your child is gender nonconforming. And so with all of the talk that we've had in the last segment, being a parent and being a young person, navigating the waters of that which is relatively unknown has got to have its own difficulties. And I think it's something that other people either are not relating to or they don't know how to start relating to your journey and your journey as well. Mm-hmm. What advice, Laura, would you have for parents who are looking at their child saying, I'm not sure what I'm seeing here?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that there are some children who are very aware right away when they are young. As an example, Jazz, who just came out with her show recently, and she knew at the age of 2. Most of the time, the children know instinctively, and I guess I use that word instinctively very clearly, because instinctively they do know that they are different. It is more the parents that take time or ignore or don't understand. It isn't something that you anticipate that your child will pop up one day and be able to explain to you at all. I think that for in our purposes, Nathan, he knew. And he demonstrated to me in very small little ways of wanting boy sneakers and wanting to explore the world in a traditional male fashion. And that is typically what people say, oh, you have a tomboy. I don't know that Nathan was a tomboy, he was a boy. So one of the things that a parent does need to do is observe, watch, wait. But when there is consistency, and a persistent effect that the child is consistently saying to you, I am a boy, or demonstrating it over a period of time, then a parent needs to listen to that. They need to investigate and decide, is this something that I need to talk to a specialist about? And that is indeed what we did over a period of time. I think that Nathan lived as a male in our home for some time before we even got there. But when Nathan just came screaming out to me, don't you get it, Mom? I am a boy.
There you go.
There you go. I was somewhat floored, and I was not completely surprised, but I was floored. And I think that it took us a while as a family, and it doesn't happen overnight. And it is something that you just need to observe, take time, explore, find out more little by little. It's not an easy task. I think oftentimes people feel, oh, you're just following your child's lead. It's not like that. It's not that easy for any parent whatsoever.
So Nathan, it sounds like you from an early age knew how to advocate for yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it sounds like you had the strength of character and explaining to your mother who you were. How about with your friends? I mean, growing up, you've got your family, and then friends are also very important too.
Yeah. I'm very open, so all my friends know. And when I'd first tell them, it surprisingly wasn't that hard, because it is me, and I normally tell them like new friends very soon if they're going to be in my life, because if they don't like it and I'm not bonded to them, it's no skin off my back. But if we spent like years and months getting to know each other, then I tell them, then they freak out. Then
do you have a lot of people who freak out, or not so much?
No, I've been really lucky. So far, I only had a couple of parents of my friends freak out.
So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the difference in generation. The generation I grew up in and your mom grew up in, and the seemingly more open-minded culture of young people and the fact that young people don't seem to be the ones freaking out. It seems to be their parents. So, you know, how have you kind of navigated other people's parents?
It's not been easy. One of the things and one of the reasons that I think education is critical. I agree that a lot of our parents, or Nathan's age parents, grew up in the 60s and 70s and things kind of liberalized, the gay revolution, Martin Luther King. There were a lot of, you know, exposures to things that people were not used to. And now it really is about what is being transgender. And the same impact that I find with the parents is not too dissimilar than our growing up. Who is this person? Where do they live? How are they? You know, what are they going to harm my child? And one of the things that we noticed in the Fairfax County group that I had attended when we were running the vote is that the parents are very afraid because they don't understand. There's a lack of education and knowledge about what is a transgendered individual. And so with lack of knowledge comes fear and prejudice, right? And it's quite potent and quite strong. In Nathan's family, we are very loving and very accepting. Some kids do not have that luxury of growing up. Some children who are transgender do not grow up in families like that. And so they have an enormous amount of battle and challenge to go through. In the school systems by themselves, the teachers and principals are working with us, and things are moving along very, very positively. And with the children that Nathan meets, it's fairly positive, as you stated. It's like, oh, well, that's interesting, tell me more about it. And they're more open-minded being young. But it is the parents that end up hurting my son, who end up saying things that are very cruel, vulgar, and inappropriate, and they don't realize the impact on the child. As I don't know if it was stated earlier about the suicide rate and the level of depression that students and kids have in general, or the transgender community. It's enormous. So if you say that 8% of the average teenager is looking at that as a way to escape their lives, it is upward between 50 and 80% for transgender youth. And what I would like to see is a level of education with the parents and school systems that they tend to be the ones that are abusive. They tend to be the ones that are bullying. They tend to be the ones that tell their child, do not hang around with that person, they may hurt you. Or if they go into the bathroom, they might harm you. And it really, in all honesty, this is an innocent child who has a wonderful heart and a very warm and loving individual, and very creative individual, has no ability to hurt anyone whatsoever. He's just living his life authentically. And
which is what most parents would want for their child,
Absolutely.
any child.
Absolutely.
There was an interesting campaign not long ago that was on social media called "What I Want My Teacher to Know." It was a hashtag, "What I Want My Teacher to Know," and they asked like third graders, you know, if you could tell your teacher anything, and it actually ended up kind of going viral because these young kids were told all kinds of things that their teacher had no idea about it. So if you if you could fill in that blank of what I wish my teacher knew. Going into the first day of every school year has to be a little bit thought-provoking. I mean, how does that feel to you, and what would you want people to know on day one like you're going to go back to school in another month or so, and what is it you want your teacher to know on day one when you're sitting in their class and they don't know who you are?
Yeah, I don't know exactly. Like, I'm just going to get the general anxiety of going back to school. I don't really think about what I want my teachers to know about me. Just
maybe that you're just smart and well-mannered.
I'm a good person.
You're a good student.
I'm not a troublemaker.
You're there to be succeed. You're there to be successful, and you're there to learn. And I mean, you know, when people get to know each other, but I very much because I think a lot of times teachers have not gone through any kind of training. And without policies or administrative policies, what the school board has done in not addressing this any sooner is left it to a classroom teacher with no training or experience, or a principal with no training or experience, to look at a child and say, okay, I can manage this, but how am I going to manage all of these other kids and all of these other things happening in my classroom? No one told me. We were talking about the framework in business for transition policy, and in the workplace it's kind of like, this is our policy, and everybody knows it, and they can look it up online and read it. But in our school systems, there is no such framework.
No, and as a parent, I am building that pathway for them. All throughout, Nathan transitioned through middle school, which is a tumultuous time anyway. But I was at the principal's office and at his counselor's office and talking to his teachers all along the way and educating them. And I think that there are a few issues that are really still not there. When you have FLE, Nathan was sitting in FLE for girls. Not a comfortable zone for him.
That has to be like
right?
They have these like huge books that are like the male sign and the female sign, and the teacher checks off which sign you are.
Which sign you are, right? You have to sign up, right? The bathrooms are one or the other. It came to a point where Nathan had so far along transitioned that the janitor yelled at him for going into the girls' room because that was the accommodation. He could not go into the girls' room to change out for gym, so we had to make accommodations for him to change out in the girls' room out in the hallway by himself. And the janitor saw him and said, "Boys, no boys in that room. You're not supposed to go in there." And I guess that was, an aha moment for him that he had transitioned to such a place where he was really authentically recognized as a young boy. But it was still a call out in the middle of the hallway, a screaming and yelling at him, something that is really, really challenging. He has to go to the nurse's restroom, and he's in high school now. So these things, these accommodations, they're being made by me along the teachers working along their pathways of what they're capable of. But in any of the FLE programs, there is no mention of transgender. It's not accepted. So those are things that you cannot educate the children to educate the parents. You can't get rid of or mitigate bullying if you cannot educate. So if you are unable to explain what is a transgendered individual and why are they going through what they're going through, no one chooses to be transgendered, and it is actually a wonderful thing, but people are unaware of that. And so without that education, you have no way of mitigating bullying.
Well, what I hope for you, Nathan, besides the start to a fantastic school year when school starts again, I hope you write your coming of age story, because I think the world is long overdue to hear the voice of someone like you talking about what it means to come of age in this world, in this time being you. Thank both of you so much, Laura and Nathan, and I hope this will not be the last show that we do on this issue, and I hope that anytime I can help with your advocacy efforts, that you will call on me, and I hope you will continue to educate everyone in your school. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
After the break.
Necesito trabajo. I would like to speak English better. Me gustaría hablar inglés mejor.
I want to be a U.S. citizen.
Quisiera ser ciudadano de los Estados Unidos.
For over 35 years,
Por más de 35 años,
the Hispanic Committee of Virginia has been serving our community.
el Comité Hispano de Virginia ha estado sirviendo a nuestra comunidad.
Job training and placement,
Capacitación, ayuda para conseguir trabajo,
education for children and adults,
educación para niños y adultos,
immigration, naturalization, and medical referrals
ayuda para los procesos de inmigración y naturalización y orientación sobre médicos
are a small part of what we do.
son solo una pequeña parte de lo que hacemos.
For help, information, or to volunteer,
Para ayuda, información o para ofrecerse como voluntario,
contact the Hispanic Committee of Virginia,
comuníquese con el Comité Hispano de Virginia,
helping everyone participate more fully in American society.
ayudando a todos a participar plenamente en la sociedad norteamericana.
Hey, Lena, where's yours?
Would you notice if you were missing half your kidney function? According to the National Kidney Foundation, 20 million people have chronic kidney disease, and 20 million more may be at risk and not even know it. Anyone with high blood pressure, diabetes, or family history of chronic kidney disease is at risk. Early diagnosis is vitally important. To get the whole story, talk to your doctor and visit the National Kidney Foundation at kidney.org or call for a free brochure. Because when it comes to chronic kidney disease, you might not know the half.
we're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back. This is Inside Scoop Virginia. I'm your host, Catherine Reed. Tonight we're talking about transgender issues. And joining me in this last segment of our show is Roxanne Edwards and Emma Chattin. Roxanne and Emma co-founded Second Fridays and Fourth Fridays as a transgender support group. In addition, Reverend Chattin is also with the Metropolitan Community Church. Thank you both so much for being here.
Thank you for having us.
So, pick one of you to tell me how you came up with the idea of starting this support group. What was the genesis? And
it began when we were talking about having the first Northern Virginia Transgender Day of Remembrance service. And that is a service designed to memorialize the lives of trans individuals who were murdered due to transphobic violence over the past year. On average, one trans individual is murdered per month. At most risk are inner city trans people of color. So, as we were doing that, we visited area support groups. And in the process, we said, we think there might be room for something more.
We've been involved in support groups for a number of years, and each one has a particular focus. We had one that was primary called Transgender Education Association, and it was the center for a lot of people for many years when everyone was quite closeted, and it was a very difficult period. So for about 25 years, that was the main focus. Wow. And we saw that there was a need for a larger opportunity for more people to be able to have support and build a different kind of community. So we invited people that we knew, and it grew from about 8 to 30 to 40 right now.
30 to 40.
Mm-hmm. One of the things, even in terms of calling it a support group, I tend to think of it as a community building group, because
I like that better.
Yes. This is a group that's very much in need of building a community. In the process of doing that, which we call Second Fridays for the community itself, I got calls from parents. And they began to add up. And after a period of time, I asked Roxanne, I said, I have about 10 parents now who have called me. Let's do another group for the support of parents, because the children know who they are and who they want to be.
I got that sense from Nathan.
Oh, absolutely.
And from Nathan's mom.
Amazing
He knows
young
who
man.
he is.
Amazing young man. Who really needs the support and connection, however, are the parents. And the parents feel very alone. And it is probably some of the best work that I think I've been involved with, when you see the parents in room with each other saying, I know what that's like. I'm not alone.
One of the interesting things is that the support groups have always been for people who tended to transition much later in life.
Right.
And they had to actually live through a long period of time of aloneness, feeling like maybe there was something wrong with them in ways that kept them very hidden and closeted. And frankly, just being able to come out was really a wonderful thing. But we said, if we could prevent that, if we could have it so you're not waiting 40 or 50 years before you can do this, let's see if we can support the children. And it was the parents that we really felt we needed to focus on, because they're the ones who are most traumatized. I'm a parent and a grandparent, and I see how important it is for my children and my grandchildren to feel loved and accepted for who they are. So we just felt that this was a critical thing. There's so much misunderstanding. It's terrible.
There is, but I have to say, shows, and so we were talking about culture and the fact that you don't legislate culture change.
Exactly.
Culture changes a lot of it through pop culture.
Mm-hmm.
And so the show Transparent took the world by storm, mainly because not only was it an original series by Amazon, but it actually won an award.
Right.
And when things like that happen, not only does it seem like it came out of nowhere, but suddenly the world sits up and pays attention. Like, what is that show and what does it mean? And a lot of focus ended up being on what you were talking about, the people who are all of a sudden way later in life transitioning. They have spouses, they have children, grown children, adult children, grandchildren.
Absolutely. I mean, that show is not really fiction. The person who created it, their parent transitioned in their 60s or 70s. So that was a very personal story, and I think it connected with a lot of people, because it's the family story that's most prevalent in that.
But it's kind of flipped around. When my husband and I binge watched it during a blizzard. During a blizzard, we watched the entire series. But what struck my husband Tom was, like, the children are so awful. like, I don't believe the show is real because nobody's children could ever be that awful. I'm like, Tom, I don't think they're making this up.
I don't think so.
But he was astonished.
Yeah.
Well, when one person in a family transitions, the whole family transitions, willing or not. And so you may see a lot of resistance, a lot of confusion, a lot of why can't we go back the way that it used to be? A lot of that happens within families. So it's a very accurate portrayal.
Absolutely.
So from the faith community perspective, you know, a lot of the resistance, a lot of the ugliest parts of this debate are launched in the name of some biblical understanding.
Correct.
And that disturbs me probably more than anything else. Really, if we look at the Bible, I think we're probably only talking Deuteronomy 22, verse 5. That's really the only thing in the Bible that says anything about gender. And it's included along with all the other Levitical prescriptions of not wearing two different types of cloth together, which would rule me out. Most of us out, not planting different types of crops together.
Right.
So we really don't even know why that was included there, but we're pretty sure that to try and apply that to transgender and trans communities is really not appropriate.
I think the most difficult thing is that there isn't really good dialogue. Everyone's yelling at one another.
That is true.
There's so much anger and fear. I come out of a strong evangelical background, and I know the mindset there is they want to protect their children. They want to do the right thing. I give them credit for that. But that fear that something is going to happen that's terrible without really finding out the information accurately is a very bad situation.
It hurts me when people use the Bible to justify a social bias, and that's what I see a lot, and that hurts. Because I think the trans community can be a great source of transformational spirituality, showing everybody that we can change.
Yes.
So there's a group that Equality Virginia has worked with, People of Faith for Equality in Virginia, and that to me was a groundbreaking sort of thing that kind of provided a collaborative platform too for other ministers of faith and congregants to come together behind the equality issue. But you know, so there's still work to be done there. But the bigger this issue of transgender youth, and especially the school system's role, seems to be the one that has captivated everybody's interest. And how do you anticipate that the faith community will meet that?
That's a very good question.
I think that is a good question, but I also think that it does begin in the faith communities itself. Many faith communities I've talked with are now having to deal with the integration of trans individuals into their congregations. To me, that's exciting. To a lot of ministers, it's scary, and they don't know how to do it. But interfacing with other ministers who have gone through this, I think we have a great opportunity in front of us for growth, and I think now is the moment.
And what do you think as far as clergy? I know when my good friend Amy Butler went to Riverside Church in Manhattan, the interim pastor at Calvary Baptist Church in D.C. was transgender and with a wife and 5 children.
Allison Robinson.
Yes, and MSNBC did a wonderful profile, and I'm thinking, will this in some way be a groundbreaking thing among the clergy who have up to this point not felt pressed to address this or have not necessarily taken a strong stand? Is having someone in your ranks that visibly representing both the clergy and a transgender person, is that going to be the beginning of something we're going to see among clergy?
I think so. I think there are more than just this individual. There are a number of people. But try to cut through the number of voices that are out there right now to really be able to be heard. It's very difficult. I go back to it. There's a lot of yelling and screaming that's going on. And just to be able to have a calm dialogue is so important.
And so how do you invite people in? I know that because we're out talking about your support group, but what about people who just want more information? What about people who are not necessarily immediately touched by a transgender person in their life, but simply want to understand, where do people in this world go who are interested in understanding or learning the vocabulary or having the ability to hold a conversation with somebody? Where do they turn?
Well, I think that the address at the church, they can kind of look there. They can kind of look at the church. They can also look at other organizations like the Transgender Education Association, which is really going to refocus its mission on education, helping to educate schools, companies, Even the military is going to need some hand-holding.
Right. The National Center for Transgender Equality is another organization. The great thing is we didn't have the internet years ago.
Can you imagine trying to do this without that?
Well, people did it, but it was extremely difficult. Now you just Google and you can find information. So that's wonderful.
I think it is. I think we are kind of at this very critical point, and certainly here in Virginia, we have we have a lot of the pieces in place, including a governor and an attorney general and other people who believe in equality and civil rights and human rights, who are taking up this flag, as it were, and trying to lead us forward as a commonwealth. And I'm hoping Virginians will be open-minded as we move forward in addressing these things. And I really appreciate the fact that you all have done so much with your second Fridays and fourth Fridays. Second Fridays and fourth Fridays, to offer a place for people who are in transition.
Yes.
And I appreciate too that your work with families like Nathan and Laura too. I know you spoke twice at the hearings at Fairfax County School Board.
Yes.
That was very contentious. I was there for the first one, and it was
brutal.
It was frightening, actually.
It was difficult, but I really have to hand it to the school board, who really stood up and did the right thing. And I have to believe that what we were seeing there was a lot of anger, a lot of fear, and most of it was based in fear. But it was difficult. It was difficult to hear and difficult to go through.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I know, and I am very concerned because I know a lot of those school board members, and they're all up for re-election, just like our entire legislature is up for re-election. And this is one of those off year elections where I don't think the average voter understands that life turns on a dime. And we all need to be paying attention to the positions a lot of our policymakers have in this arena with both the LGBT rights, but particularly trans equality, trans rights, and trans protection.
We do have an opportunity to become a much more inclusive society, and I really think that this is an exciting time in history. I think that it's an amazing time to be alive, and I do think that you're exactly right. We need to spread that and to support the individuals who have their eyes on the future, because this is where it is.
Well, thank you ladies so much. Roxanne Edwards and Emma Chattin, I so appreciate you being on the show.
Thank you.
We've got resources for you. If you want any more information, you can certainly reach out to me. I'm easy to find, Catherine Reed. And I hope that you will join us for another Inside Scoop when we have more of these community individuals back to talk with us about how we can support issues in the transgender community. Thanks so much for joining us.